Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this video, the Idahosa effect on the modern day Nigerian church. When I look at the Nigerian church today and I see the low levels to which it has slidden, my mind goes back to Benson Idahosa, Pastor Benson Idahosa, who started a kind of ministry back in the 80s. And I think what we see today is the fallout of the things that he started back then in the 80s. And I'm not saying this in a good way. I'm saying it in a bad way, actually. Because I remember in the 80s when my dad at the time was not a Christian, but he could easily spot what was fraudulent. He wasn't happy that Idahosa would collect money for prayers, and he would call him out. And we actually watched and witnessed Idahosa on TV, asked for, we witnessed him ask for 100 naira for a special prayer. And we said, yes, what daddy is saying is true. This guy is asking for 100 naira for a special prayer. But that is not really, perhaps that's not really the Idahosa effect. What I consider the Idahosa effect is when himself and people like um, Oritsejafor, they started preaching a gospel of wealth. And there's a popular statement that people like him started making, my God is not poor. In response to them today, I say, why would you smear God with your personal insecurities? Do you think God thinks about if he is poor or not? That's your own personal insecurity popping up from your background, what you think about yourself, just the things that have formed your psychology at that point in your life, these things that form your psychology from your history. So that was complete nonsense. So the thing is, for self-esteem, Benson Idahosa, he had the title of an archbishop. I don't know how that comes, but I call him a pastor. Pastor Benson Idahosa started measuring his success as a person by how many people he had in his church, how wealthy they were, and how wealthy he was. Because I think he had some self-esteem deficit on account of the time when he lived in Nigeria. In Nigeria at the time, if you don't have a degree, you're not a lawyer, you're not a doctor, you're not a teacher or something like that, you're like not respected so much. So he had that he brought it into his ministry. And on other pastors now, on account of that, they started measuring their success the same flawed way. Whereas you're supposed to measure your success on account of, or measure your success by the number of individual lives you can transform to be more like Christ, to feel the love of Christ, know it, and be able to give that same love to another human soul. Whereas that should be the true measure, it became numbers, church buildings, cars, and all that. I remember when they used to boast about, hey, how many cars they have parked outside the church building. And so other pastors who didn't want to be outdone, they started having that kind of inferiority complex. Well, this is my church. How many members do I have? How many cars are parked out there? How poor are we? Are we really that poor? Are we successful? Before you knew it, that became the standard. And that has led to a rotting of the society because church is supposed to transform the human to become more like Christ. I remember in Scripture Union years ago when someone was preaching. Scripture Union used to be very wonderful. I don't know how it is now, but I guess it will be similar to what it was back in the day. He was talking about how God should help us take root downwards and bear fruit upward. Take root downward and bear fruit upward. That's what our life should be. And it was so beautiful and sweet to me as a 11 or 12-year-old boy. So that is the derailment that the Idahosa effect had on the church. In fact, that is the derailment I think he had on the church. That has become the effect. It has rippled over the years in the church in Nigeria, so that we're heavily churched, but the people that are churched are void of character. So as the nation goes down the precipice, the church cannot be salt to the nation, and the church goes down the same precipice with the nation. The salt, the nation gets rotten even if it is heavily salted with salt, as Nigeria is heavily salted with churches and church going people. That, for me, is a tragedy of where all of this started. And unless pastors can swallow their pride, unfortunately, it looks as if it's hard for them to do so because they've been so indoctrinated and they're so loyal to the sect that they belong to. If they can swallow their pride and say, look, some of these things we're doing, the citadels upon which, or the foundations upon which we have built, the citadels of our institutions are, are faulty. Except they can do that, things will continue this wrong way. And it's going to take an outside force to stop them. And now that outside force is coming. It's coming through men of God who are exposing the wrong doctrine, and also through incidences that nobody's even really responsible for. It's just happening. But I don't want to derail from the real topic of this video. I want to end this video now and remind everybody, and for those who do not know, to tell them that this is where it all started in the 80s, when people like Oritsejafor and Benson and Idahosa started preaching the prosperity message, living out the real work of discipleship, thus watering the quality of the fellowship of brethren together, where it was about touching and transforming the individual human soul. And I dare say, or might let me add, touching the human soul with love.